I'm thrilled today to be with Cindi Carter, an old friend. I've learned a lot from Cindy, and Cindy is going to be talking to us about how to define a modern cybersecurity architecture. So, Cindy, welcome and take it away, please.
Setu, thank you so much for having me today. What does it mean to define or create what we're referring to as a modern cybersecurity architecture? And when you think about the fact that the minute you buy a new phone or get a new TV within a week or even sometimes a day, that technology starts to become obsolete right away. And the same thing happens with architecture in the cybersecurity realm, and especially with information technology, because I always consider this as a partnership. We're always looking together to deliver services and solutions to our businesses safely and securely. So as we move along, we'll go ahead and describe that why just a little bit more, because I think that context is always super important in conversations. And it really enables the security team, the IT teams, and across all of the business units are totally engaged in all of this, but they need to understand how do we come to maybe having some aspects of poor architecture in our organizations. And we all have this. We all have obsolete or legacy technologies. In healthcare, you think about the fact that sometimes there's Windows 95 machines saving lives. But we all know from a cybersecurity and an infrastructure technology perspective that we need to at least put in some compensating controls or some mitigating circumstances so that that obsolete technology does not negatively affect patient care, of course. But think about all of the different obsolete technologies that are in our organizations. The investments have been made, and we need to figure out, if we're not able to replace that right away, then how do we secure that? Redundancy. This one always gets me. When we think about the fact that so much data is collected and repurposed and reutilized in our organizations, and you think about the sprawl of all of that data that may not be necessary in all of the various places that it is, no longer just in the four walls of our own data centers, but saved on our mobile devices, whether it's our handheld mobile device, that supercomputer that we call our phones, or our laptops that we're carrying along the road with us. That data is everywhere, and much of it is redundant. And of course, going to the next point on that, much of it is still unprotected. There are thousands and thousands of sensitive files that may escape the traditional cybersecurity protections. So with that, we'll look a little bit further about, what this is going to sort of describe the water for us a little bit, really. But you think about that in terms of, we have the critical vulnerability database, and we think about the fact that every time a vulnerability is exploited, well, we knew about that one 5 years ago, and yet we're still, I'll say the word, we're still unpatched, or we're still unprotected against it, because threat actors do exploit vulnerable architectures, and it's in the news every single day. And so with that, some of those aspects of that vulnerable architecture, we all know this. Brand reputation gets damaged. The cost of either paying ransomware or not paying ransomware, and the recovery aspects of a compromise, those all add up. Not to mention, in highly regulated industries, the fines and the lawsuits can prevail, both civil as well as in that regulatory space, no matter what your industry is. But those are just some of the fallout aspects that happen when a vulnerability has been exploited. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit more about what are some of the challenges with this fragmented architecture that we have. And when you think in terms of organizations that are either starting to move to the cloud, or maybe in that sort of hybrid space, again, this is a little bit more of that describing the water. But ransomware, phishing, and those types of compromises still prevail today. And when those threat actors exploit those vulnerable architectures, it results in some of these biggest risks being realized in our organizations. Ransomware, phishing, supply chain attacks, those aren't new. Those have been happening even before the movement into the cloud. But much more prevalent as we see that our architectures are becoming fragmented, they're becoming disjointed. we don't have a holistic view from an infrastructure technology as well as a cybersecurity perspective on how to make sure that we are protecting the right people at the right time, at the right place, and giving the access to the right information all at the same time. And so really, I love this slide only because as we've gone through probably the last 10 plus years of cybersecurity and infrastructure technology and business innovation, and we even saw just in the last 2.5 years when the pandemic occurred, and just the fact that we as an industry, cyber infrastructure technology, IT, we as an industry we really are able to pivot pretty quickly on solving the challenges that come with delivering our IT services and making sure that our businesses can stay up and running. And we still need to be able to do that securely. And this slide for me represents the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, all of those different point solutions become unmanageable. And at some point, you have to step back and simplify and think in terms of how the cybersecurity and the IT teams think, maybe feeling as they're trying to manage, in some cases, 40 or more different capabilities to secure the organization. And this is why we need to take a step back and take a look at that architecture. So here's how we're going to talk about how to implement what we refer to as that modern cybersecurity architecture. This is a little bit more describing the water, but setting the stage for this conversation. We all have legacy systems in our environments. That's not going to go away because, like I said, the minute that you buy something new, it's going to become outdated at some point, whether it's sooner or later. Now, hanging onto those Windows 95 machines may be pushing the envelope a little bit, but we get it. And then, of course, new technologies, new capabilities are coming along all the time. Think about how quickly we innovated when the pandemic hit, where many organizations that had never been able to support a remote workforce before, how quickly they were able to do so. And businesses were able to thrive, businesses were able to continue to innovate, and employees were still able to do their work safely and securely. But now we've all said this, we've all heard this, especially in cybersecurity. There's a massive lack of resources. At some point, Setu and I want to retire, right, Setu? We're going to make that happen at some point in our lives. And we have to set the stage for the next generation of cybersecurity practitioners and infrastructure technology folks to be able to take the reins from us and be able to do that with the knowledge and the understanding of how IT and security come together from an architecture perspective. So when you talk in terms of, if you even look on some of the job websites, LinkedIn or Glassdoor and so on and so forth, security architects or architects in general are in huge demand right now. Because when you're focused on solving something on the network or solving something from an IT perspective or from a cybersecurity perspective, when you step back and take a look at the bigger picture on how all of those things come together, that takes a real skill set to be able to have a knowledgeable conversation, whether it's software, whether it's the network, whether it's something in between, whether it's talking about cloud. And those architectural resources are necessary in order to be able to take those conversations forward with the business. And of course, we're always going to be constricted by budgets. We all have to pay for things, and we know that, but we want to help our organizations spend the money in the right place and at the right time. So this is just a sampling of different types of architecture frameworks that are out there, and some of you may be very familiar with these. Some of these lean more towards the software development side of things. Some of these take a more holistic approach to cybersecurity and IT and enterprise architecture together. And of course, notice that I put on there the Cloud Security Alliance, because that is where a lot of the focus of many organizations is what does it look like for us to leverage the cloud in a more efficient and digitally transform our organization that way. And one of the examples that I have from one of my past employers where I was working was we were looking at some secure software development. And many of our software developers didn't even know how to recognize a SQL injection. They didn't know that some of the code that they were writing was susceptible to cross-site scripting. And it wasn't until we started to provide a framework like this, and especially the education around what secure coding best practices looked like, and then gave them a lab environment where they were actually able to use these frameworks and test their code against a vulnerability scanner to find, oh wow, this is where I have some maybe unparameterized inputs in my code that I need to make sure that I write this a little bit differently so that it's not vulnerable. But these types of conversations that you can have across your organization help bring all the different entities from the organization together to have that conversation about architecture. It's not just an IT conversation. It's not just the cybersecurity team. It's your enterprise architecture coming together along with the business units to understand how we are going to innovate the business and what does it look like from a platform perspective, from a technology perspective, and from a security perspective to deliver that business or that service or that product to the organization and to the masses in a safe and secure manner. And this is really, I will call out the elephant in the room. When we started to have some of these conversations that I was mentioning during that example, nobody wanted to spend any time with us because when you think about it from a software developer perspective, well, we need to write this code quickly. I've got 2 weeks. I need to get it written. I need to get it functioning. And I need to either move it into production or hand it off to the next team so that they can put their components in and around it. And that's a very agile mindset, right? It's about delivering value more frequently, more often to the end customer. But when you ask folks to step back for a moment and let's really get on a dry erase board and really talk about where's the data coming from that is an input to this application? How is it being used? How is that data being used? How is it being accessed? Who has access to it? And then where does that data go once this application hands it off somewhere else? And is it encrypted? Is it encrypted at rest or in transit? Even what kind of data is it? Now, I might be giving you a little bit of a hint towards what a real threat modeling exercise looks like, but that is part and parcel to the cybersecurity architecture and IT architecture conversations. Because in order to be able to design something securely, you do have to have that transparency and that visibility to where the data is coming from and where it's going to, and all of those different points along the way. And so here's just some very simple, short and simple bullet list for some of what the principles are for having that look at a security first architecture viewpoint. And the one that I really love in the middle, they're both actually both in the middle there. Start from zero. Now, zero trust is another conversation that we could have all day long. But what I was talking about in the previous slide was that data modeling, that data flow, that threat modeling conversation. That's really what start from zero looks like. That is ensuring that you have the data identified, the people identified that should have access to that data and what kind of access they need and for how long they should have it, and so on and so forth. And that's what start from zero means. It means peeling back all of those layers and really getting that holistic understanding of that data's journey throughout your environment, as well as maybe if you're sharing it with third parties and what happens from there. That hyper transparency is something that's not easy for teams to really embrace at first, because a lot of folks tend to be in their own wheelhouse, right? But now we're sharing our wheelhouses together all in one place with this one holistic architecture viewpoint. And I'll land on one last example here. I had an example where the organization was actually looking towards moving our corporate environment into the cloud. And the first thing I asked was, do you have an architecture diagram that I can see that shows what the network topology looks like for this? And I got blank stares. And a lot of that information was in people's heads. A lot of folks didn't have that written down. And what they did have written down, the person sitting next to them would take that piece of paper and say, oh no, it's really like this. And they would make these corrections. So we had to take a step back And the teams had to come back together on what our existing architecture within our own data center, within our own perimeter looked like, so that we could understand what it was going to look like for us to lift and shift that corporate environment into the cloud. And guess what ended up happening? 2 weeks later, they came back and said, we are not ready to move this to the cloud. It took another year for us to be able some of the technology transformation beneath our belts and to get some better security protocol and understanding of the IT protocol before we were ready to move that system to the cloud. And this is something, I love this slide here too, because it does put everybody in a very uncomfortable place. When you're having that first architecture conversation, that first data flow diagram session, it's not a very comfortable space. As I mentioned, people are in their own wheelhouse. But as you start to have those conversations over and over again, as you take each and every single application or each and every single item and start to look at what does it mean to move this into the cloud? What does it mean to uplift this technology or this capability that is supporting it? I won't even use cloud as an example. We get better at it. You always get better with your experience over time. I think in a very compartmentalized way, it just helps me with the communication aspects, especially when I'm speaking with our boards. But when you look reading from left to right and you look at network and security management, and then you go right over to cloud, and then you look at what your user and access security is like. And then, of course, the things under consulting and support can't be overemphasized here, right? You need to make sure that you've got that life cycle type support aspect in there, and MDR, managed detection and response, and even the extended part of it now come to play in all of this. A lot of organizations have many different overlapping cybersecurity solutions and IT solutions for supporting all of this. And you really can, with a look at a holistic architecture of what problem is it that you're trying to solve and what capabilities do you have to solve that with, and you start to take a look at this can help you build out a strategy for that modern cybersecurity architecture. And from that strategy, you can then create your roadmap and then your projects to execute from. A program is really a group of projects that have a known start and end date. And I think in terms of security and the work that we're doing to enable all of that with IT as a practice, because it's ongoing. We're never done. Security's never done. Technology is always evolving. And some of the conversations that some of the leadership folks like to have across the business and boards of directors is, okay, well, show me the money, right? Show me where I'm going to have some increases in things or some decreases, but can you quantify some of this? And we absolutely can. When you do take the time to step back and start think about when you consolidate some of the different capabilities, the disparate tool sets that you may have, and let alone the education around for the team to learn all of those different tool sets, you are going to realize upwards of a 40 to 50% increase in operational efficiency alone. And I like to think about that in terms of the example I have is I had a team of about 7 or 8 folks that were in my SOC, in my security operations center. And, they ranged from security engineers to security analysts, and they all had their 3 monitors and a bazillion different screens in each of the 3. I swear, I don't even know if I could stay focused on any one of them at one time. But they were always heads down, looking and learning at all of these different tool sets. But somebody said something to me one day, and I'll never forget this. And they said, you know what, though? I love learning all these new technologies and capabilities, but I don't feel like I can ever really learn something really well. And I worry about what maybe we're missing. Are we not configuring something that should be configured better, or maybe not at all or all the way? And that really got me thinking about where that operational efficiency aspect comes into play. Because think about the frustration that your team could be experiencing trying to manage all of those different capabilities all at once. And then something goes wrong, and then the frustration with trying to figure out, well, which area did it go wrong in? What did we miss? And so on and so forth. So that's one example I like to share when I'm speaking in terms of the operational effectiveness. The second thing, of course, is, you are going to save some money when you start to think about how much money it costs to manage all of those different licenses, all of that disparate vendor risk management that you have to do. And oh, by the way, just because it's a security company that's your vendor, don't assume that their security practices are as good or better than yours. You still need to do your third-party risk management on every single vendor that is supporting your network, your IT, your cybersecurity, your business. And when one of those licenses expires without maybe warning, and you think about, oh no, we have a license that expired, and then people may have to spend some extra time to figure out, okay, how do we get that license renewed really quickly so that we can bring this service or this solution back up and running? Think about the production costs that cost you, the savings that you will then realize by dealing with fewer licenses and so on and so forth. So again, those are just some examples that I like to share there because it really does matter. And this is one of my all-time favorite quotes right here. And I'm just going to read it the way it is, because when I think about analogies, if physical buildings were anything like digital systems that we have today, experiencing a breach practically every day, every week, what have you, the news would be full of collapsing buildings and crumbling bridges. So we need to step back and really think about our cybersecurity and IT architecture in that way and take us forward into creating a modern cybersecurity architecture for the years to come.